Okay, so this is roughly our schedule right now, and you will see that we are on Wednesday, December 5th. This is the last day of actual class. Friday, well, let me start. So today we're going to finish up the lecture on the walk cycle. I honestly don't think it's going to take a ton of time. We're going to finish up those last few poses. I'm going to show you how to duplicate those poses and paste connect them so your character can essentially walk off into infinity, right? So tomorrow is usually when I have my office hours. Thursdays in the mornings up until about 2:15 is when I'm usually just in my office for you to stop by and ask questions. I'm actually going to be out of town tomorrow during most of that because I have to go to a funeral. I had an uncle pass away, and my family lives about 3 hours from here. So I'll be back sometime in the late afternoon, but tomorrow night is the first pass of portfolio reviews. Well, not the first pass, the first night of the final portfolio reviews. I still don't have a list of the actual order in which everyone is going. So I can't tell you for sure which one's going to be animation heavy, which one's going to be modeling heavy, like any of that stuff. It's kind of a roll of the dice. I would say just show up when you can. For the extra credit on that, basically what I'm doing is on the graded projects, I am going to the projects, not the exercises, because that will give you the most amount of sort of bang for your buck. I'm going to one of the categories. So let's say you have one project where you had a 20 out of 25 on there. I will just go to one of those categories where you scored a little weaker and give you a +1 in one of those categories. So it could raise your grade from a 25 or a 20 to a 21, which doesn't sound like a huge increase unless you realize like that raises you from like an 80 to an 80, it's like an 84, I think it is. So like that's a pretty big bump just in one grade. I'm taking that almost a half a letter grade up. So that will make a big impact on people's grades. The way you prove you were there, I'll accept a couple of different things. Any creative proof you want to show me. The two ways that seem to work the best is if you want to write a quick paragraph saying, this is some of the things I learned while I was there, this is some of the things I thought were interesting, whatever you want to do there. And then just drop that in the folder up on the network, marked, I think it's portfolio extra credit. The other option is if you want to take a selfie with the faculty in the background. That one is because a lot of people already have to write so many things at the end of the semester, and I'm like, another paragraph for me. I get it. Like, you don't want to do it. I'm doing that one on sort of the honor system that you didn't just walk into the room, take a selfie, and leave. If you go through all of that effort and still don't get the benefit of sitting through some of the portfolio reviews, like that's kind of on you. Like it really is an important thing for you to experience. Like you will someday be one of the people who's standing up there presenting to that room full of people. So it's really good to see how that goes before you have to get into that. So Thursday is that. Friday morning is the second portfolio review, starting at 10 o'clock in the morning. I have a feeling we probably won't be going much past lunch, maybe 2 at the latest, I hope. And so if you have to work that night or something and you want to come in for the Friday morning ones, it's not super early because none of us like waking up at 6 a.m. either, even though I do every day. However, on Friday there's no classes, right? So we aren't going to be like the university officially has no classes are closed that day or canceled that day or whatever, and that's to give you time to study or to work on your projects or whatever. That is the last day you will find me in the building before your final is due, right? So try to find me on Friday, maybe after the portfolio reviews if you have a question, because a lot of these questions are hard for me to answer over email, right? I mean, I can if you explain it clearly enough or show me some examples, but I as you've hopefully seen already, sitting down with you and helping you figure out what the problem is usually goes way faster. And we have our final scheduled for Monday, and I put it in at 10:30 a.m. 10:30 a.m. is when we'll kind of get started. I'll swing by, I'll grab some donuts or something, stop in here. You'll get your files up, try to get your files in there by 10:30, and we'll just watch your final project and eat donuts and laugh and cry, and it's all the great stuff. It's
10:30 or 8:30?
I'm sorry, 8:30. Did I say 10:30? Yeah. Did I say 10:30 out loud?
Yeah.
You said it was supposed to be 8:30.
It's 8:30, not 10:30.
Yeah.
No, you wish, right? So, 8:30 a.m. So pretty much the same time as this class, because I'm always wandering in late anyway, right? And then after that, you're done. However, generally what I do is I say until the last day of class or until the final exam is when I'll accept revisions. I recognize that the two alternatives for that was either the 10th or the 12th. And you all chose kind of the earlier date, but I will still be putting in grades for my other classes all the way up till the 12th or 13th, right? So I'm going to go ahead and make the deadline for revisions the 13th, okay? So as long as you have it in by, let's say by class time, well, let's say by noon on the 13th, then I'll accept it and include that into the revisions grade. Again, drop that in the revisions folder. Don't drop it into the original graded folder, because I've already gone through those folders and I am not going to remember a difference between like two files. Like, I'm not going to go scour each of those folders every time and try to remember if there's something's changed. So the revisions folder just lets me know that there's something in there. Everything should be graded up to this point, with the exception of your discussion about the jobs. I've kind of peeked in there every now and then. I'm trying not to be too involved in that, because I want you all to be talking about this. What's your thoughts about that right now, like the job discussion? Anybody discovering anything they didn't expect?
A lot of jobs or certain companies will pay to relocate you, more than I thought they would.
Yeah, I think especially if it's there are certain positions that are harder to fill than others, and that's sometimes a perk to get somebody to move away from one side of the country to the other. When I worked at Firaxis, they paid relocation. What I will say that's interesting about that is they don't just send you a check and say, move on up here. What happens is you put that on a credit card and they pay you back. So that usually happens. So, but still, that's better than nothing, right? Like you use that when they pay you back, or borrow money from an uncle or something like that. And then they pay you back. When they pay you back, though, it's taxed at a different rate. So it's not always you still lose a little bit of money on that move, but it does help a lot. There are some companies that are really generous who will move you there and give you a place to stay for a few weeks while you find an apartment or a house, which is really that's a part of this you may not be thinking about it. Somebody's like, oh yeah, we need you here. Can you start in 2 weeks? And you're like, that's 1,000 miles away, and I have no idea where I should be looking for an apartment, right? And if it's in somewhere like San Francisco, and you're like, I'll just look next to the company. And it's yes, rent is $4,000 for a 1-bedroom apartment or something ridiculous. That's having that extra time for stuff like that is really important. Anybody find anything location-wise that you thought was interesting in the job search? Where were most of the jobs at that you were finding?
For me, it was mostly West Coast.
West Coast. And is that in games or animation?
Games mostly.
Yeah. Something I'll show you. This is a pretty interesting. There's one for film too, but they've actually recently taken that site down and they're rebuilding it as a better version. But if you look up game dev map, this is a map of all the game development companies in the world. Well, all of them that are in this database. And what you'll notice is that there's like, it's not just like the entire U.S. is covered, right? Like, you probably shouldn't live in this big empty area here if you're wanting to make a video game. Each of these are major cities, or not always major cities, but cities that have at least a few game development companies in that area. On the West Coast, you're going to find like San Francisco, LA, Redmond or Seattle, like around that area, and maybe a little bit in Oregon, like Portland. On the East Coast, like it's usually going to be like Raleigh, maybe a little bit in Florida, like Raleigh, New York, Baltimore, and some in Boston. Atlanta has a little bit. So, like, the weird thing about how this works is it's like the game companies seem to sort of cluster together, and I think that's because, you know, back in the 90s, there was like Microprose or some, you know, giant game company that shattered when it broke up, right, or when it closed down, and a whole bunch of those people started their own game company right there, right. So I think that you're starting to see a whole bunch of stuff like that. So that's something to consider when looking for jobs. Like, where do you want to live? If you want to live on the East Coast, you probably are not going to be living, you know, on like Roan Mountain driving to work every day, right? You're going to have to move somewhere a little bit closer to one of those hubs. Nashville's starting to get a little bit of a game development hub, and but it's kind of smaller indie studios. However, saying that, like if you're wanting to do indie games or indie animation, freelance animation, you can kind of live anywhere, but it's just harder to make those connections. So I think that's an interesting thing to look at. You can use Game Dev Map as well for this exercise or for this project. Like if I click on, let's do Raleigh, you'll see this list of all the game studios in Raleigh. And I can say, Puny Human, that sounds interesting. Let's see what they make. And here's the team that makes that. This is actually a company that sort of broke off from Epic, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, so this is all the games they made. And usually you can go in here somewhere and find something. Open positions, there we go. About the jobs they're looking for. So right now they're just looking for a UE4 engineer in Raleigh. So that's another way that you can find jobs is by going to the company. If you're playing some game or watching some animation that you love, go to their website, go to that company's website, and see where that's made and how they made, or who's working on it. See if they're hiring. So hopefully this, I'm gonna peek in there a little bit later on the on that discussion and see how it's working. I'm also like kind of not great at D2L yet, so I apologize if that discussion board was just a jumble. Like I'm sure there's a better way I could have organized it. I think what I should have done is made it a single topic, and you all discussed under that topic, and instead I made it a forum, and each of you made your own topic, and that probably makes it a little bit more difficult to bounce around. So anyway, I'm learning too. So.
I think that's a little old, that database a bit. So one company doesn't exist anymore.
Which one?
Boss Keys.
Boss Key doesn't exist?
No, they lawbreakers bombed so hard
They shut down.
Really?
Yeah, that doesn't exist anymore.
Interesting.
Kind of had it coming after those comments.
So actually, Boss Key was another one, because isn't this the one that Kurt Schilling, not Kurt Schilling,
The guy that made Gears of War was the one who made the studio.
yeah, I
Cliffy B.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he. I actually watched a talk by these guys. This is the company that kind of broke off from Epic. I guess Puny Human. Actually, almost every company in Raleigh kind of split off from Epic in some way or another, except Insomniac. That's interesting. I didn't know that. That's kind of sad to hear. All right. So back to this lady. Hopefully you all are getting close to this point. If you're not, that's okay. Like that's why I record these videos, is so you can go back and watch them later. There we go. Turn down the volume on that a little bit so it's not busting your ears. So what I have right now, if you'll remember, we can go back to the previous video. I have walk cycle go to these images, and we will look at. There we go. So if this is our key poses, if these are our key poses, I've made my contact, and then I've made another version of this contact way out here on the end of my walk cycle, right? Because for this to cycle, it has to end at the same place it started, right? That way it can start all over again and you won't have a weird pop, right? So I've got those two poses, my beginning and my end contact pose, and now I need and I created the one in the middle as well, which is pretty much the same pose except for a mirrored version, right? And we can see that if I just hit play. I mean, I also have my neutral pose. So here's my first contact. Here's my last contact, which is still the same pose. I just slid it forward, right? And then here's my middle contact, which is the same pose mirrored. There are some tools in Maya you can use to mirror those poses, but really I usually just kind of eyeball it and try to get the same qualities in it as possible. You don't want your walk cycle to be absolutely perfect anyway, just because things don't move perfectly, right? There's little inconsistencies or changes in it. I'm also going to go ahead and turn on auto key. Now if I hit play on this, right now mine's going to play super fast, right? Yours may be playing that fast as well, and you're animating to try to, and while you're animating, you're trying to make it look the right speed. And that means when you render, it's going to play it super slow. Like every semester I get this. If you look at your keyframes and how far apart they are, if they're more than like 30 frames apart, like if they're like 150 frames apart between your two contact poses, your walk is going to look like it's in slow motion. Right? So the way we make sure we're seeing this at the right speed, I know we've talked about this since the beginning of class, right click, playback speed, real time. Right? And so now we'll get to see this is the speed of the animation. Now it's a start, right? We have the legs kind of kicking around underneath the character, but there's just a lot of stuff that is missing in this to make it feel correct in terms of physics. This is the part that everybody underestimates, right? Not you as students necessarily. You're probably in this enough to where you already see this is going to be some work, right? But when you talk to your like friends and you're like, I was talking to a guy the other day and I told him I do animation, and he's like, oh yeah, that takes forever, right? It probably takes you like an hour to do like 5 minutes of animation, doesn't it? And I'm like, yeah, at least. Like, so, and I'm like, no, it takes me about 40 hours to do 10 to 15 seconds of animation. That is the world we live in. Like, that is how 3D animation works. And that can be a little frustrating to people when they get into this, because I'm sure you all have lofty dreams of making like your own animated series or your own animated movie. And you can. Just recognize that like anything else that is worth doing in the world, it just takes a lot of work, right? So it's this stuff in between that people underestimate. That they're like, why can't I just be done there? Like, it's moving, it's animate, right? I guess it has life in it now. But we, as humans, like, especially if we're animating a character, like, you watch people move all day long, right? Actually, probably one of the things you watch people do more than anything, well, probably more than anything, it's you watch them sit still, like you're all kind of just sitting here right now. But the second thing would probably be watching someone walk, right? So we've watched that so much, we've seen that so much that we can tell when something is wrong with it. Right? As I start doing this, you'll start noticing, oh, it looks like the character's limping, or oh, it looks like there's some weird hitch in there. And it's because a walk is actually a very like choreographed series of motions. Right? If you throw one of those off, if one of those is incorrect, your character will fall or trip or whatever. Right? So that's why we're sort of using these poses, like just history and observation has taught us these are the poses that are necessary for a walk to feel correct. Now we currently have, let's just sort of look in between our contact and our contact here. If I want to put another pose in here, I got 3 to choose from. I have my down, my passing, and my up, or my low, passing, and high. Which one would you go for? Which one would you do next?
Pass.
Passing. So really, it feels like most people would choose one or the other. They would either choose the low pose, because it's the one right after your contact pose, or you'd choose your passing pose, because it's the one that's sort of in between the two. I would choose passing, and the reason for that is because we have to get all 3 of these. But if I get the passing pose kind of fixed correctly, then it will be less work for me to get the down pose, because Maya will do a little bit of that transition for me. It won't be correct, because Maya's going to make kind of some not smart decisions. But if I do my passing pose, then those other 2 poses will be a little easier to get after that. That's not always true, but you can sort of break up animations into chunks like that, right? Like if you're doing I'm not gonna try to find an analogy right now, but I think this is a good analogy, or a good example. So I want to do this passing, and then just to make sure I'm kind of getting the mirrored version of it, I'll do this passing. At that point, our walk is actually going to look much better. And a lot of people want to stop there as well, but we're not going to. We're going to get those other 2 to make it look perfect, or as perfect as possible. Actually, let me raise this thing. I want to stand where I can see everybody while I'm working. I'm probably knocking stuff off. Right? There we go. Okay. So, if this is my contact pose, my passing pose is going to be in between my 2 contact poses. And if I just go about halfway in between there, you'll see I already kind of have something for a passing pose, right? It's just kind of weak. If we look at our example, our passing pose, our character has one leg on the ground, and it's relatively straight and kind of pushing the character up, right? And then the other leg is passing from behind to in front. Right? So both of the legs are kind of passing each other. One of them is straight and on the ground, the other one is up in the air. So let's go ahead and figure out which one should be straight and on the ground. This one is the one that just came in and contacted the ground, right? If we look at that step, it just contacted the ground. So it has to go flat and start to, and the character has to start passing over that leg, right? So that means when I go here, that's the leg that I'm going to make straight. This is the leg I'm going to make bent. So I'm just going to go ahead and bend that one just so I'll remember. Just sort of kind of get that one in place a little bit. Now getting this one on the ground, there's a couple of tricks you can do. One of them is if we zeroed this out and if we modeled our character to where it looked like they were already standing on the ground, then I should be able to just zero out my translate Y values by typing 0, and it'll put the character's foot on the ground. You'll also see that it's kind of leaning a little bit. It's got a little bit of a wobble from side to side. And that's going to be the rotation Z, it looks like. Let's try Z. I'm going to zero out the Z. I think that fixed it. What did X do? Yeah, so I'm zeroing out my Z and my X. I'll go ahead and leave the Y, because the Y is like the little slight angle where the toe's pointing out. And the last thing is I need to flatten out that toe so I can zero that out as well. This is why we freeze those transformations, because that makes this part, getting this back to a default pose, way easier. So I'll go ahead and push my character up. I will get this foot in a passing pose. So I'm going to put a little bit of drag on my toe. Maybe even angle this out just a little bit. And angle my knee out just a little bit. Right. Now, something I want you to notice is from this front view, my character's foot, this foot is off the ground. So that means this is the foot, the character's right foot is the foot that is supporting them. Right? And that means that that foot is the only base of support. Everything over that, gravity is pulling straight down over that foot. Right? And since so much of the character's weight, like pretty much, let me kind of draw this here. So this is the character's base of support. You can't see that. Show. So this is the character's base of support, right? And everything over that foot is being supported, right? But look how much of the body is hanging off this side. Look at that. And that's all still being pulled on by gravity, right? So I in other classes when we're going to talk about body mechanics a little bit more, I'll make you stand up and try this, but later try it. If you stand with your feet apart and your hips are in the middle of those 2 feet, like in between them, you can't pick up one of your other feet. You'll fall, right? The only way to pick up that foot is to shift your weight over the foot that is supporting the character. So the way I would do that is just grab this control and nudge the character's weight over. Now I may need to move it a little bit. I may even want to rotate it a little bit, right? But now I have this pose where the character looks more in balance. Now, where I've restarted my computer, I lost my little button to select all the controls, and so it's probably something you all would want to see again on how to make that button. If I go down to the very bottom corner down here to my script editor, open that up. I think there's another way of opening that as well. So, Windows, General Editor, Script Editor, right? But this is where all of my scripts are happening, right? You'll see auto key ran. You see if I select an object, it creates this select-R root control, right? All of these things are little scripts that run every time I do an action. So if I go to Edit, Clear All, it will just wipe out my history of what I've done, right? And then I'll select these objects. I'll select the root control, I'll hold Shift, select one foot, I'll hold Shift, select the other foot, and now those 3 lines of script will select my entire character. If I were to, copy those and paste those down into the script editor, or even to paste them here, watch what happens here when I run this. It selects all of my character's controls, right? So you don't have to love scripting, but this is a really easy tool to leverage. You never have to memorize any syntax or anything. All you have to do is middle click and drag this to your shelf, and you can create a button. It didn't ask me what kind of button. It usually asks me if it's mail. I bet it's because I pulled it from this mail window. So it just runs that script, and now I have this button that will run that script anytime I click it. Yeah. So that's a really nice way of making a character picker. Like it's a way of picking your character. If you have a much more complicated rig, you can create buttons for certain parts of it, right? You can create a button that just selects all of the fingers, or you can select a button that selects all of the face controls, right? So that's what I'm going to do, and I'm doing that because I still have values in this channel box that don't have a key on. You see how my scale, my visibility, my translate X are pink? They have keyframes on other frames, but I haven't nailed them down here. So that means if I change something on translate X later on, it will mess up where translate X is on this frame. So just to nail everything down, after I select them, I hit S, and now I know everything has a keyframe on it in these poses. And if we watch this, it's going to look like there's a limp. Looks like she kind of limps there. That's because it's asymmetrical. Like, we have our passing pose looking nice on this side, we don't on the other side. Right? On the other side, she still has that weak looking passing pose. If you think of a limp, that's all a limp is. One step is different than the other step. Right? Maybe you've injured your leg, something like that, and that means when you put weight on that leg, you do it differently than you do it on the other. Right? So Little inconsistencies are going to cause your character to look like they're limping. If the character goes up higher on one side than it does on the other, it's going to look like it's limping. So you want it to be close to the same. You don't want it to be exactly the same, but pretty close. So what I'm going to do now is get my passing pose on the other side. So again, I'll do this one a little faster. So 0, 0, 0 out my toe. Great. Go ahead and move my character up a little bit, over a little bit. Make sure I still keep a little bit of a bend in that knee. Some of you will notice if you pull this too far, the character's feet just kind of drag behind them, and that's wrong. Like what's actually happening is that IK we put in our control has stretched past the length of the bones, right? And if you think of your body, if your leg stretches past the length of your bones, they're gonna break, right? If we let our character do that too much when we're moving it, we get this like popping in the knees that we call IK pop, and you'll get much better at like noticing that as you go along. But that's why we always try to keep the leg, like if we get it straight, we get it really close to straight, but we don't lock it. And we don't like do that, we just get it like that, right? And then this other foot, I'm gonna get in my passing pose. So it's passing by. Again, maybe get some interesting angling on this. And I'm gonna sort of drag the toe behind just a little bit. Right? Again, select the entire character, hit S, and so now my character is in that pose. And if I watch this walk cycle now, it's going to look much better than it did when we first got started. So it's getting closer, right? Again, for a lot of people, they'll want to stop here, but there's a lot of things that are still kind of missing in this. It kind of feels like the character isn't heavy enough, right? Like that there's no weight to this. And that's because if we watch from the side of this animation right here, right, the character isn't going up and down very much. It's mainly just kind of going straight across the body is, right? And if we look at our walk pose, we'll see that our low pose right here, that's where our character absorbs the weight from that step forward, right? So you dip in just a little bit. After you go past the passing pose, your character starts to fall forward, and usually you sort of roll up on your tiptoe to buy yourself a couple of more inches of time to get your foot out in front of you, right? So your low pose and your high pose, or your down and your up, are the lowest and highest points of this walk cycle. And currently our walk cycle doesn't have either of those. Also, our low pose is where our foot goes flat, right, and our back foot pushes off. So I'm going to go ahead and make our low pose next. Here's the issue with this. When I make the low pose, I've just done this enough to know, I'm going to make my low pose on both sides, and we're going to watch it, and the animation is actually going to look worse than it does right now. Like, that is like where you have to trust the process. The reason it looks worse is because we don't have the up pose, right? So I'm going to make the down pose. We'll watch it, and it'll be like, it feels like she pops in the middle of this. And that's because we have the down, but we don't have the up that follows, right? So again, trust this pose-to-pose process. It's been working since about 1910, and people have been relying on it to make multi-billion-dollar blockbusters, right? So we got to trust it. It's going to work. I'm going to put my down pose in. I'm going to put my up pose in. And as long as there's keyframes on everything, like it's when I put that last pose in, suddenly it'll look better, right? That's, I think, one of the hard parts about when you first start animating, is that you see that it's not looking the way you want it to look, and your assumption is that means you're doing something wrong, right? So trust me on this pose-to-pose thing. If you're thinking about every pose and what that pose should look like, you're doing it right. Eventually it will work, right? So they need to trust me on the pose-to-pose thing, don't they, Clay?
Oh, yes.
Yes. See, he's graduating this semester. Hey, did you all get the list of when you're going?
Yeah.
Do you have that in any way, or just?
I could forward it to you if you'd like it.
Yeah, would you mind? I kind of wanted to be able to show my classes so they could decide which days to go.
Sure.
That'd be awesome. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay. So contact is right there, right? And then this is my passing pose. So that means there's my contact and my passing. That means my low pose will be right in the middle of those two. Now you can count your keys. I just kind of eyeball it. But yeah, about 3 frames in between each is where I'm going to go. And you'll see that if I just go ahead and set a keyframe there, like it's contact, down, passing. My down isn't going down very much, right? Also, my toe is still pointing up in the air, and this other foot is kind of coming off the ground, so you're kind of like, you're just skating on your heel, right? That's not right. So when we go down into that pose, your foot is going to absorb that weight and flatten out, right? So the first thing I want to do is just make sure my foot is flat on the ground. Whoa, I don't need that on everything. I need it on that one. I'm going to make sure my translate Y is flat on the ground. I'm also going to go ahead and fix these 2 rotates on there to get that flat on the ground. And my toe is flat already. There we go. Since this character's weight is kind of being absorbed on this, I'm going to push her forward a little bit and down a little bit, right? And that's going to get a bend in the knee. Now if I use the greater than, less than keys to skip back and forth between those, you'll see that what I'm getting is the knee going from straight to bent a little bit. And what that means is that your character is, like if you were to jump off of an object, let's take a step somewhere. Like you're walking down some stairs, get to the bottom step, not the top step, get to the bottom step, and jump from that bottom step down to the ground, right? What you'll notice is that you kind of straighten your legs out before you hit the ground. And the reason for that is because that's going to give your legs the most amount of space to absorb that shock of hitting the ground. If you land with your knees bent, they're already weakened, and you've shortened the distance of absorption space you get for that impact, right? So that's why our contact pose, our leg is straight, and our down pose, our leg bends, because it's just absorbing that weight of the character coming down, right? You'll notice that the next pose, the leg starts to straighten back out again, right? And that's because the character's starting to push themselves back upward again, right, with that foot. Now you'll also notice on mine that as I go through here, it feels like the foot slides a little bit right there in the middle. So let's look at that. Probably what I'm going to do is I'm just going to eyeball it a little bit to try to get my foot to not feel quite as slidey. There we go. That's feeling better. And that's just going to take a little nitpicking. I'll be honest, like other rigs make this easier, but I don't like the rigging process for that's more complicated. So we got our down pose there. The other thing I want you to notice on this image is this back foot, right? Right now, Maya is going to start transitioning our back foot from here, and it's going to start going forward, right? But really the point of that back foot is pushing you forward, right? It's why you move forward, is that foot is kind of using friction in the ground to push off backwards and propel you forward, right? And I need to sort of exaggerate that just a little bit. So I'll push this back a little bit, just kind of make it look like the character's just kicking back, right? Now at any point that I need to, I can still adjust this a little bit. Some of the things I sometimes do is I'll put a little bit of drag in the character's head, like make it feel like her head is dragging back on the down pose. And then on my contact pose right there, or my passing pose, I'll rotate it forward. And what that allows it to feel like is that her head is reacting to the fact that her weight is dipping by sort of leaning forward here, right? So you get that sort of follow through, right? and I'll add it in this one as well. So if I go back to my down pose, select everything, hit S, there should be a keyframe on everything now. I'm going to go put my other down pose in. So it's this foot. Toes okay. Gotta move my character's weight down, forward just a little bit. Drag the head a little bit. Get this kicking off. Something like that. Select everything and hit S. Let's see how that looks now. From there to there to there. Kind of feels like the foot slides back and then forward again right there. So I think I need that to be forward just a little bit more. There we go. It also feels like it slides back there though. So maybe all of these need to go back just a little bit. There we go. Okay. So like I said, now it feels like there's a weird pop in there, right? It's actually feeling a little better. I expected it to feel more messed up than this. But again, at every point, you're going to look at it and your instinct is going to say, oh, that's close enough. I'm done. Like, just trust me. Like, this last pose will make it better, okay? So the reason for our up and down pose here, right, our character moves downward here, starts pushing themselves back up, but then if we don't have an up pose, the height of the character from side to side is pretty much the same between these poses. Like, it maybe is going down just a little bit, right, on the contact. But I want my, on frame 19, like, that just looks like a weak pose, right? That doesn't look confident. It doesn't look appealing, right? There's just things that we can do to this that will make this pose stronger. So this is where I'm going to put my up pose. I'll push my character up as high as I can without breaking her. I'll move this knee up. I'm going to kind of make it look like she's throwing her foot out in front of her to catch herself. Now you'll notice that I did that thing I said not to do, which is my character's leg is perfectly straight. A couple of ways you can adjust that. I can sort of angle my character's rotation here to give that leg a little more room. But I can also do some stuff with the leg, right? I could raise the leg up a little bit, rotate it down, and make it look like just the toe is pushing off. Now, I'd want to skip back and forth between these two poses, and you'll see that in that pose, it also looks like the foot slides back a little bit. So I'll slide that forward again, and that actually gives me more room to raise the character even higher. Right? I'll do something like this. Be kind of careful with it, so don't go too far. Hit S. Let's see if that's something better. I think so. And then do the same thing over here again. This one's looking better than I would have expected, because it's kind of doing it by itself. Go ahead and do that with all of it. Hit S. Move my character's weight up a little bit. So again, this is really some fine tuning on this to get the pose right. It's very easy to think it's good enough, but there's always something we can make a little more clear, a little bit more appealing in these poses. So for example, just cleaning up the angle of that foot and getting a little bit of toe drag in there will help, right? So you'll notice that she's out of balance in this, and it's because she's throwing her foot forward to catch herself, right? This feels like she's tripping a little bit, right? I need to get that bend in that knee still there. All right, select everything and hit S. So, watch that now. It's feeling a little bit better. Kind of feel like there's a little bit of a sharp twist right there on that first step, like right there. So when she does this there, it's almost like she twists around too much too quickly. I would tell you that we can adjust this in the keyframes, but this is one of the things that the graph editor is really good for. So Windows, General Editor, Animation Editor, Graph Editor, and you'll see like this is one of the cool things about using the graph editor is we'll start to see patterns in here, right? So if this is our translate Y on our character's hips, that's our character's up and down motion, right? And you'll see like the character starts here, she dips on the down, she starts pushing her weight up, she goes pretty high there, and then she goes down there again. Her down pose right now on this is not as low as her contact pose. So that means that probably should go down even more, and maybe her contact pose should come up a little bit, right? Maybe something more like that. And then the same thing with her up pose, right? Like it goes up, but it doesn't actually go up as high as her passing pose. So that means I was probably just a little overzealous when I was making the passing pose. So something like that. Now it's messing up the knee a little bit, but I can start looking at all the channels, just kind of cleaning them up a little bit. That's okay. It's rotation channel. That is, I think this is where we're getting some interesting stuff. The rotation Y is what's causing that pop. So notice what happens is, and I know this graph editor is still a little hard to understand. What's happening is as my curve goes down, right, she is rotating to her right. So you'll see that like that rotation is happening to the right, and it's that pop right there, that extreme key right there that is causing that pop. So I could just probably bend that back a little bit and fix that popping. But when I'm doing that, you'll see I'm also messing up the knee. Right? So this is where it gets a little bit complicated. You have to go back and forth between these and try to adjust this to where it doesn't mess up the knee as bad, right? So the graph editor is going to be way easier to make these changes. You just kind of have to get used to how the graph editor works. So side to side motion. Usually we can just kind of make these patterns make more sense and it will work better. So kind of feel like there is a little bit of a hitch in her forward momentum right here and here. So I can adjust that, adjust that. And it feels like her leg is a little too straight right there. So that means she was going a little too far forward. Move back a little bit. See if that works better. Oop. It is, but now we're getting another one right there. So we can always adjust the individual limbs a little bit as well. Like right here, move that back just a smidge. Move that up just a smidge. So you're going to have to do some work in the graph editor to kind of get this cleaned up. Nobody ever enjoys watching me work in the graph editor. I don't know why. I think I'm really good at it. So. But I get it. It's not entertaining. It's also like kind of boring to do. My wife, like at parties and stuff, people be like, "Oh, what do you do for a living?" And I'm like, "I'm an animator." And they're like, "Oh, that's really interesting." And my wife will be like, "No, it's not. It's really boring." And it's because what she sees me doing is like editing these curves, little tiny bits, like for hours. There's a matrix element to it. Like I'm not seeing those curves, I'm seeing the way this character moves in my head as I adjust those things. And so like it'll happen with you too. It's just like how if somebody says, oh, you play video games, that's boring. You just push that button over and over again, right? No, you're making something happen and you're kind of visualizing that communication. So that's what we're getting here. But let's say there's still some stuff I could do to polish this, but I'm going to go ahead and hit increment and save. Let's say that I'm done with my 2 steps. Okay. Before I move on to this next part, you're going to want to make sure that this is as good as you can get it, right? Because in the space of just a few seconds, I can have as many steps as I want, right? So the graph editor is part of that. Like I'm going to just extend this out, and you'll see that what happens is she gets to the end of frame 34 here, right? And she's at that same pose that she was on 10. She's just slid forward, right? Which means if we look at some of these curves, let's go ahead and do this in animation mode so you can see this. So if we look at like her translate Z curve, you'll see that that moves forward over time, right? The character is moving forward, and we can tell that because this curve is going upward, right? It's like if we were graphing the distance she's moved almost 20 units by the end of this animation, right? And so this is the same pose, except 20 units further forward, okay? That's important. These poses have to be exactly the same. Like if this leg is a little higher, or this leg, or the hips are a little lower, or something like that, it will mess up. You also need to make sure that every control on the whole character has a keyframe on frame 10 and your last frame, frame 34, right? If it doesn't, this next part won't work either. So if I were to just go in here and grab a keyframe and right click and say copy, I can go out here to frame 50 and go to paste and just paste that keyframe, right? And you'll see what happens is my character is walking, gets to the end of this, and then from 34 to 50, it blends back to that first keyframe again, right? And if we were to look at that translate Z motion, that forward motion, you'll see the character is moving forward just fine, and then suddenly I sent him back to the start, right? Or sent her back to the start. So when I pasted that, it pasted all of the values. But under paste, you'll notice there's also the option for paste connect. And what that means is it will paste those keyframes with the shift in value that is at the end of your curve, right? So instead of pasting 0 onto the end of that, it will pay, or let's say I moved it 5 units. Instead of pasting 5 at the end of that and taking us from 20 back down to 5, right? It's going to paste 5 on top of that 20, and so it's going to move us up to 25, right? And so that's what paste connect is for. It's easier to see what that does just to view it though, right? If I grabbed this entire animation, highlighted it, so I'm holding shift and then dragging on my timeline to highlight it, and I do right click, copy. If I were to go to frame 34 and right click and regular paste, my entire animation cycle would just repeat, right? It goes back to the beginning and I see that animation again. I'm going to undo that because instead of pasting, I'm going to right click and say, well, let me actually show you that again from that translate Y's perspective, right? What we got is the character walked forward, and then suddenly it took me back to the beginning of that and started walking forward again, right? So I'm going to undo all of that, and instead of pasting that, I'm going to select everything, highlight it, copy it, and then when I paste, I'm going to paste over frame 34. So highlight frame 34, right click, paste, paste connect. And it looks like the same thing happened, except it didn't send our character back to the beginning. Now she just continues to walk forward. Okay, so if we look at my translate Y, instead of going back to the beginning, it just continued from where it was and kept going forward. So I can keep doing this. I can keep paste connecting in here for infinity. Right? Like she will walk for as long as there is a timeline if I keep pasting that in. Right? So that's how we can turn 2 steps into as many as you want. Right? I usually like to get. I think the requirements for the project was 6 steps. So we got our original 2. That's 34. Got 2 more. We got 2 more. And so we can stop her after this. So I usually like to end it on sort of her going back to an idle pose, right? I could actually copy this idle pose from the beginning, but I'm just going to go ahead and make a new one, frame 90, go ahead and hit S, and just go ahead and give her a place to sort of stop. So I'll move her forward. Go ahead and flatten out that foot again. Go ahead and settle her to a stop here. I usually also like to add like a little bit of some extra keys to make that transition make more sense. Because if you notice now, what she's going to do is just kind of go straight from there to stopped, right? And so maybe I'll do a key in between there where that foot goes flat earlier, and this foot kind of picks up. Maybe I'll even take her a little further past her stopping point for some overlapping action. So now she kind of... And I could go, I always like to add a little bit of like settle time at the end. So even though she stopped, I can continue to have her move just a little bit. To kind of give her time to kind of settle into that last pose. So frame 90 and frame 100 aren't that much different, but what that's going to give us is some time for her to come to a stop, right? So we could definitely polish this more. There's a phrase you'll hear a lot of people say, like, it's never finished, you just run out of time, right? And we know that Monday is when we run out of time, so you will plan accordingly. And the last thing I want to do is I want to decide how my audience gets to see this. So if I get a show, I can turn off my NURBS curves. This is what my animation will look like. I want to create a camera, and I want to have just a little bit of camera animation in here, not much. So I will go to Create, Cameras, Camera. I will, Panels, it's like Camera 2. I will look through Camera 2. I'm going to sort of frame this up to show this walk. I'll go ahead and hide my little helper boxes here. To frame this walk in a way that I want it to render. Again, I have to click this little blue circle up here so I can see how this is going to render. Right? And so I'm going to go ahead and start here a little closer to her, maybe on this side. Select my camera and hit S. And then I'm just going to go to the end of my animation. She's already walked off frame. Go to here. And so I'm going to still kind of keep her mostly in centered. I'm just kind of move a little bit to the other side. And then just sort of scrub through here and see what we get. Now to me, I feel like I get a little close right here through the middle. So I will go ahead and sort of scoot my camera back there a little bit, give her some more space. And there we go. I'll also probably fix this floor a little bit so she has some more space for the end pose. Just so we can see this, I'm going to apply a texture to it. Shader, standard surface, that's great. Put a checker on there. Probably too much of a checker. Gray that down a little bit. place 2D texture, make that like 10 and 10. Let's do more like 20 and 20, 20 and 20. And now you'll be able to see this animation. All right. Questions? Comments? Ideas? Yes.
You think I can get this done in a day?
Yeah. I just got it done in like an hour. Okay, so I will say, I don't know. The amount of time you put into this is important, right? I know you have other classes. I know you have, lots of things going on. Like, the way this always turns out best is if it's something you are excited about seeing the result of, right? And you may not be passionate about robots. That's why I'm like, model what you want to model, right? You can get something done quickly, right? I would say target making something that you're proud of. And yeah, I think it's actually very possible to do this one really quick. But what I would challenge you to do is periodically just sort of close your eyes, take a deep breath, and then watch it as if you've never seen it before, right? Watch it as if somebody else made it and you are, and it's really hard to do. Like, it's really hard because you have hours of work invested in it. And that's really like, but that's how everybody else is going to see it, right? Everybody else is going to watch it for the first time and not think about you as an animator and not think about the polygons that went into that model. They're just going to think about these pixels they're seeing on the screen, right? And if you do it right, they're going to forget that this was made. They're going to forget that this was created by somebody and just start to accept the idea that this is real. Right? And that's what actually is the exciting part about animation, is when you create something that people, although they're smart enough to know it's not real, like they know that in, deep down, they just accept it as if it is, right? And they're like, oh, that's cool, she's got this interesting personality, or oh, that's neat, like the way he's like all stomping and everything. And your robot isn't stomping. You made some pixels change, right? And that is the thing that that makes this gratifying, is when you can show this off and you get a response from people, right? You get people who go, oh, that's cool. And sometimes that response is easier than you might think. Like, sometimes it's something really simple. It's the difference in one keyframe or the difference in one like camera angle that makes it really appealing, right? And so I think the hard part is, like, especially in this class, like, you all are still fighting with this software. You'll be fighting with this software for a little while. It's not super easy to get used to it. The hard part about this is trying to ignore all of that stuff you're fighting with and just look at this and say, does that look good or not? Like, you are all experts at watching animations, watching film, watching motion. Does it look good? Are you entertained by it? And if the answer is no, what can you do to make it more entertaining? And what can you do to make it more appealing? That's one of the 12 principles. But yeah, I think that this is doable. I have intentionally tried to make this class projects that are challenging yet accomplishable. But I do recognize that finals week is hard. Right? So that's why I'm like, go kind of simple with the environment. If you're wanting to put some more stuff in the background, that's cool too. Do the thing that you're enjoying, right? In a year when you go through midpoint review, you should know at that point, like, this is the thing I enjoy, this is the thing I want to do as a career. So, any questions? Other questions? Yes.
I'm having it do something weird when I try to base connect the frames. Like, I did it once, and when I try to do it a second time, my character just kind of like floats upwards. I'm not really sure why.
So let me show you. I do kind of know why. I'm going to save this though. I'm probably happy with that. File, increment, and save. So what's happening with that? And this is a good question because other people will have this problem too. Remember when I said frame 10 and frame 34 have to be exactly the same? Let me go ahead and delete all these others here. Delete. So let's say that they're not. Let's say that instead on frame 34, my character is a little bit over to this side, right? And I thought it was the same, but she's just a little bit off to one side. The same way that forward motion will paste to connect, that difference in the side-to-side motion will paste to connect as well. So if I highlight this, actually let's make it even a little bit more obvious just so you can see. I'm also going to push her down a little bit lower, right? Let's say keyframe. If I highlight this, copy, and then paste connect to that, at the end of this walk cycle, that difference is going to be exaggerated. Right? So now she's going to be like this. Right? And then if I paste connect again, she's going to be under the floor, right? And what we're going to see is happening is that little change over time is, let's look at this through a different camera. That little change over time is compounding, right? And so that's one of the reasons you need to make sure it's pretty close to the same. Really, your translate forward, your translate Y should be the only curve that is messing up. So if I, is changing. So if I were to go to my graph editor here and look at my translate X, my side to side, this is my starting key, but my ending key is way down there, right? I really need this to be back up here where this was, right? And I can actually copy that value. If I highlight here, it's this second value here, 0. So if I paste 0 into here, I can kind of start to fix that. The other thing that's happening is my translate Y. You'll see that right here, my value is -0.5. I could paste that into the end here and sort of fix that. And then I think that paste connect will work again. So my guess is it's either that or there's one of those controls that doesn't have a keyframe on it on frame 34 or frame 10. So make sure there's a keyframe on everything on those two keyframes and it should paste connect okay. Other questions? And if that's still messed up, let me know. I'll help you with some of it. Other questions, comments? So again, this is like the last time we're going to really be in class together. So like literally any questions or comments. Are you curious about midpoint review? Are you curious about portfolio? Are you curious about international affairs? Like whatever. Yes.
Can I make this happen while he walks? It won't make any sense unless I show you.
Okay, yeah. The answer is probably yes. I'm cool if you want to put some extra style. Yes, absolutely.
Is there a way I can do that easily, or do I just have to keyframe that the whole time?
Yeah, you may just have to keyframe that the whole time. Actually, there's a lot of stuff that you just have to manually fix sometimes. Like animation is very tedious. Like it takes a while. So, you had another question?
Yeah, I was just saying I fixed the keyframe that works now.
Does that work?
Yeah.
Cool.
It was slightly different.
All right. Well, I will see you all at 5. Oh, yes.
Are you going to be in the building? What is it? Thursday, Friday?
We actually talked about that earlier. I will not be here Thursday morning because of a funeral I have to go to. I will be here Thursday afternoon and Friday, but Friday morning is also when we're doing the other part of portfolio review. After that's over with, I'll just be in my office until the end of the day, so you can catch me one of those times. And if you have other questions, I will be here later today. Well, I'm here all day today, but I have classes until about 2:30. Most of those are work time on those classes, so if you happen to find me in a room, you can usually sort of elbow in there and ask a question too. So, that'll also yes.
What time is all day? Like the end of that?
Oh, 5. I usually head out about 5:15. Yeah. Sorry, I kind of forget that. That's.
I'm just here at 3 in the morning.
Huh?
I'm just here at 3 in the morning.
Yeah, I probably won't be here at 3. So, I have been here at 3 before when I was a student. I've slept in this building a few times. I know that for some of you, this is your last finals week. Or I'm sorry, your first finals week. Some of you, I think it's your last finals week too. I think some of you are going to graduate soon. It'll be tough. Like, you'll get through it. You'll learn how, like, this is where you learn time management. But I would just, ask you to be like safe. Don't push yourself too hard. Like, just get that day of the final is going to show up. Time won't slow down. All you can say is the day you get to that, you can say you did your best, right? If you get to that day and say, I could have tried a little harder, then that's something you have to learn from. Just put in as much effort as you can right now. I promise effort is the only key to this. Like, nobody is born being good at this. We'll talk about that actually on the last day. But yeah, any other questions? I'm going to go ahead and upload this video, and I'll kind of walk around and answer any questions you all have. And again, you can catch me other time in this class too. So.